Well, thank you everyone for joining me this morning and afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. This is BrandSquare, and I'm Kathy Oneto, Vice President of Brand Strategy out of Anthem's San Francisco office. And I'm going to be speaking to you today about what women really want from health and wellness, and that's across 3 generations of women. So one thing before I get started, I will admit that some of my slides, given the format here, might start to get a little hard to see. So if it helps you and you'd like to, up in your upper right-hand corner, there's a maximize button. You can tap that, and it should make the slides a little larger for you if you're having trouble seeing some of them. But with that, let's get into why did I want to look at health and wellness and specifically look at women. And you'll see on the left-hand side that, one core reason was that as we look at our clients and look at various companies out there, a number of them, as you look at their mission statements, focus on health and wellness. So we know that it's important to to many businesses out there. We also know that it's very important to women, that there's really a need here. And as you see on the right-hand side, a statistic there from Intel that says that some 94% of all women say that living a healthy lifestyle is very or somewhat important to them. And on the bottom there, you see an image from a program from UCSF, a well-known medical establishment in my neck of the woods, that is actually offering a public program this fall focused on women in health and wellness. And they're offering this because they recognize that women are leading quite demanding lives today and are needing help in understanding how to take care of themselves. And then finally, we wanted to look at this because as we started to do our own research, we were really not finding a lot of information that was specific to women and understanding their motivations in this space. So as we started to do our research, we looked at really developing a deep understanding of women in order to understand how to connect with them around health and wellness. And our approach focused on first understanding her world, really understanding her life context and her behaviors, then understanding her goals and self-identity. And we looked at that around motivations and expectations, and I'll say more about that a little bit later. And then we wanted to understand her brand relationships in this space. How is she engaging and how is she buying, and what brands are really successful here. We conducted 3 different studies to support this presentation and a paper that is in progress. One was deep qualitative research with 15 women, 5 in each generation, where we did deep one-on-one interviews to really understand their motivations and their understanding around health and wellness. We then complemented that with a quantitative study to complement and validate some of our findings. And then finally, we had done another study as well that was a quantitative study where we tested some understanding of health motivations. So where we'll begin and what we'll be exploring today, we're going to start by talking about health and wellness and the meaning of health and wellness. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about motivations versus expectations. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 generations, and then go into marketing, health, and wellness. What were our learnings there, and what it means for all of you. I have probably a little too much to cover, so I'm going to move fairly quickly. Luckily, the presentation will be available online after for you to reference through the presentation, as well as we can make our paper available to you as well, so you can get more of the details and some of the details that I'm not going to be able to get into today. So let's start by talking about, well, what does health and wellness mean? And what we found is that commonly health and wellness is defined as being a balance of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of one's life. And what we found in our research is that these women were defining it in very similar ways. And on the right-hand side, you can see across all of the different generations, some examples of some of the language that these women use to define this. So as an example, with the millennial at the top, health and wellness means taking care of your mind, body, and soul. But what we also found was that health and wellness is quite broad, holistic, and whole life oriented. These women really laddered it to broader meaning of quality of life and happiness. They also really talked about it as being about choices one makes and about a lifestyle that one leads. And you can see the quote at the right-hand side where a woman said, health and wellness is choices every day that you consider to be healthy choices that also make you happy. So what we found was that our definition was similar to how the National Wellness Institute defines health and wellness, which is an active process through which people become aware of and make choices toward a more successful existence. Now, while these definitions were common and consistent across all of these generations, what we were also finding was there were slight differences in each of these generations' definitions of health and wellness dependent upon their life stage. And I'm going to just go through this as a very high level, but generally what we were finding with millennials is that health and wellness kind of was about aspire, so about helping them meet their aspirational goals and how they're trying to be their ideal selves. Generation X, given their life stage, health and wellness is a little bit about helping them be established and helping them do all that they want to do in their lives today, and really being about strength and productivity. And as one might imagine, with baby boomers, what we found was that health and wellness was defined around this idea of extend, really about staying vibrant into their next act and really becoming their real selves and really trying to achieve new dreams. So again, while there was commonality in what we found and how health and wellness was defined, how it starts to come to life for each of these generations of women was slightly different based on their life context. So I want to now talk a little bit about motivations versus expectations and how this relates to women's goals and aspirations around health and wellness. And I'll start by talking a little bit about, well, why do we talk about motivations and expectations? And it's because here at Anthem we believe that speaking to women's motivations is a more powerful way to engage with women today. I wrote a paper last year around women and this idea of they have newfound power, but there's these persistent expectations that they feel. And as part of this study, we found that 86% of female respondents thought that women should both pursue their own personal motivations and be able to make their own choices and not be judged by them. So these women want to set their own course. We also found in a study that we did for this research or for this topic that 66% of women believe a brand that motivates me to be healthy is important when considering brands or products to buy. So they are actually looking for brands to motivate them to be healthy. And then finally, frankly, women just want to live in their motivations. As we did our qualitative research, we had these women do collages, which you'll see a few of in a moment. And we had them do a collage of their motivations around health and wellness. And we had them do a collage around their expectations around health and wellness. And if you just simply ask them, in which world would you rather live? All of them, hands down, said, I'd rather live within my motivations. And we believe that helping them do so is a more powerful way to support women in achieving their health and wellness goals. So I want to just give a little bit more dimension to this to help understand, what do we mean as expectations versus motivations. This example came from some additional research we were doing with millennials and trying to really understand their motivations and expectations. And this was from one young woman in particular, and we were trying to get an understanding of what ads were speaking to these women, which weren't. And for this young woman, you'll see an ad on the left where it was about this young woman that was dressed very precisely and going to work. And this for her represented her expected self of who she's supposed to be as she goes to work. In contrast, you see the middle image, which is what it was motivating to her. It really spoke to her more of her real self. She liked the tussled look. She's like, I'm not perfect in the morning. I'm often tired going to work in the morning. She loved seeing the realness of the bag and the prominence of the product even in this ad. So there was a realness that really spoke to her. And then even on the aspire side, you might see that ad of Janet Jackson and think that it might have been an expectation, but for this young woman, it was quite the opposite. She was actually like, you go, girl. So it was an aspiring ad for her, seeing this ad from Janet Jackson. So it's really, our point here is that these ads can speak to women in different ways and that we believe motivations are more powerful than expectations. And we also saw this show up when we looked at ads around health and wellness. So you see an expected ad from Garnier on the left-hand side where women are kind of like, I don't understand how my hair can quite look like that, to an ad from Advil that was really took this real dimension that was really spoke to women. And then finally, the Nike ad around making yourself proud that was quite aspirational. And I speak a little bit more to that at the end of the presentation. So around health and wellness, when we did our study, we found 10 top motivations for health and wellness across all of the different age groups. And these were what they are motivated to be health and to achieve health and wellness for, if you will. And we tested these and validated these also within quantitative research, and they're in priority order there. But I will say that all of these rated above 80% in terms of women being motivated to have these things and achieving health and wellness to have these things. So everything from feeling good to being happy and quality of life to being at peace with myself, being confident and feeling strong. We also found 10 top expectations that these women felt, and we also tested these in quantitative, and they're in priority order. And while there's a little bit more variability in how expected women feel across all of these, it ranged everywhere from like 80% to about 60% across all of these dimensions. And I thought what was interesting here was what rose to the top, and some of the things that women are feeling expected to achieve around health and wellness. So taking responsibility for my family, making others happy, eating for health rather than for enjoyment, and also being responsible to the planet. It was really interesting to see, from my perspective, how high up the list this was ranked. But you also see the things like you might expect: looking good all the time, looking young, and being naturally beautiful. So now let me get into a little bit of detail on the three different generations: Millennials, Generation X, and Baby Boomers. And as we define these generations, there's different organizations out there to define them. We use the Pew Research Center to help guide us on how we've kind of defined and what years we use to define each of the generations of Millennials, Generation X, and Boomers. I'm going to go through this at a high level as I get into each of the motivations and expectations, but again, you'll have the presentation to kind of refer back to, so I'll kind of hit some highlights. So Millennials was really interesting. You know, when I think about younger people, often I read, well, they don't care about health and wellness. They'll eat whatever they want, what have you. But it was really quite the opposite as we talk to Millennials. And what's interesting in terms of what's happening with them is that they know the world is their oyster, and they feel the pressure to now conquer it. And in our study last year, when we talked with Millennials and we tested a statement around, do you feel pressure given all the newfound power that women have today? It was the Millennials who felt that pressure the most of any generation, as one might expect. And because of this, they're stressed out. This generation is quite stressed, and they're having this quarter-life crisis. They have a keen sense of the economic reality and awareness of challenges to come. And in addition to that, they are already feeling quite a bit of pressure to kind of find and establish themselves and be independent. You add on to that the fact that, we all know they're very connected, given they grew up with social networks and what have you. So they live fast, on-demand, and connected lives. And the impact of that is that they feel this expectation to constantly be doing interesting things and almost always be doing things that are almost like Facebook-worthy, if you will. And they also have this expectation around feeling always happy. It's not like you can post perhaps on Facebook that you're not up this day. It's kind of this expectation that you're always on, if you will. And I think what was interesting with this group too, when you get back to the pressure, we had some young women we had been talking with, some who had gone to Stanford, and it just the weight of what they felt based on the degree of education that they had. I have to do something with my degree. I went to Stanford. It was really interesting just feeling the pressure and stress that some of these women feel. So on the screen here, I'm just going to highlight, as I mentioned, a couple of the motivations that these women feel. And on the right-hand side, you'll see just one of the collages that one of these young women created representing their motivations around health and wellness. So again, this group is really, as I mentioned earlier, focused on aspiration, idealism, and really being positive. And we had some women using language like, I want to be queen of the world, I want to be unstoppable. And yet, these women also are wanting to be at peace and comfortable. As I mentioned, they kind of already want to be settled and want to know, like, who am I? Am I in a career path that works for me, etc. On the expectations side, these women also, their expectations versus the other groups were a little bit more higher order. So again, that happiness feeling, the need to always be happy was showing up, always needing to be upbeat. they also are feeling this pressure, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of have it all together, like to already have their career worked out, to always have, look good and presentable, to have the perfect body. And as you see in the visual to the right, and this is not uncommon, frankly, across all the generations we talk to, that this perfect body image kind of shows up quite a bit. So now let's talk a little bit about Generation X. As one might expect, this group is more focused and on a path, but this is also the generation that really bears the brunt of the do-it-all syndrome and this idea that they're always going and going and going. And yet they're a bit skeptical about the past before them because of some of the pressures of the economy, because of how boomers are staying in the marketplace and the job force longer. So they're a little skeptical and understand that things aren't going to be smooth. A lot of these women are also balancing, and balancing a lot in their lives, and they feel a lot of pressure around, we're damned if we do or if you're damned if you don't. And while women are getting married later, they still place a big significance on the importance of marriage and relationships. And it also starts to show up that around health and wellness in particular, these responsibilities to more than oneself becomes more prominent, even with parents aging more, but also amongst friends. And then if you are married and have a family, with your spouse and with your children. So around motivations for this group, it was really achievement-oriented. There were a lot of women that were focused on drive and productivity. We also, around physical health, this idea of function over form. For these women, it was not about being skinny or thin at all. It was about being strong, and you can kind of see that in this image to the right in the collage of this woman doing a push-up. They want their body to function for them. It's not about being stick thin. And yet these women also are really desiring a positive body image. Again, they're trying to get beyond that. It's about being skinny and having to look good for somebody else, but rather to be really comfortable in my own skin or in my own body, if you will. In terms of expectations, as you start to talk to these women, they do get a little bit more expansive than millennials. It's kind of as if expectations grow as one gets older. The interesting thing here around being healthy and well and the expectation there was that these women feel it as an expectation. There was one woman who said, not being healthy is a sign of weakness. And they also get a little frustrated by these expectations that they feel are unrealistic. Being so specific, having to worry about the BMI and the little details of all the nutrients one is supposed to get, or the fact that perhaps one isn't supposed to have any bad food, or the idea that everything's supposed to just be peace, love, and harmony, any kind of calm. So certainly some interesting expectations there. Let's talk a little bit about boomers. These women are really dealing with big life changes, as one might expect. They're entering their third act. They really have a sense of purpose and accomplishment. They are not down and out. They're looking for what more they can do. And yet they have real medical challenges. This is when it starts to show up. And yet they're operating in a world, some of these women said, that has really shifted quite dramatically from how they kind of, in their young adult years, what was known about health and wellness and kind of what the expectations were there. So around their motivations, they really are focused on themselves again, trying to focus on achieving their true self. This is where real health starts to show up, right? They are focused on survival. They're concerned about, people said, worrying about letting myself go. And you can also see it even in this collage where you see this determined to live being here. And they are determined. They want to be prepared. They're optimistic in that and think that they can take this on. And yet these women are also more at peace. As one might expect, you get smarter, I think, as you get older, or maybe wiser, as opposed. So these women were more talking about, taking it as it comes, being open-minded, and understanding that attitude is important. And then with expectations, that real health shows up again. The fact that, these women are focused on, they actually said, I need to stay out of the hospital. But again, this looking good also shows up yet again in terms of an expectation. It doesn't go away. And you can even see it in the collage again in terms of this 24-hour mascara where this woman was like, I don't even understand why you'd need 24-hour mascara, or age-defying. Well, of course they want to look young, but it almost starts to feel like this pressure that, you're not supposed to get old. So I know I'm getting short on time here, so I'm gonna quickly get to some of the learnings on marketing. What I want to just highlight here is that as we started to understand women's life context, understand their motivations and expectations, we started to look at the categories of food, beauty, and health, and how brands were relating to women in this space. And we really wanted to understand which brands were really communicating well with women and why, how those brand relationships were being structured, and whether or not motivations versus expectations were what were speaking to women in this space. One quick thing I'll just touch on here, and then I'm going to skip to some of the more key learning. One thing that really showed up, and I said it earlier, but that these women really see how intertwined functional and emotional is, and you see the quote in the upper right, I believe that physical and emotional are one, and around these categories, this showed up pretty strongly. Functional is very important. Don't forget functional. A lot of times people think that emotional is all that matters. Both matter. And I think in this health and wellness space, linking these two is quite powerful and certainly across these different categories. So let me jump a little bit here and get to marketing health and wellness and some examples of what we learned about brands doing it well. One thing I'll touch on briefly is just that, some of these brands were able to cross generations. There were actually many that were able to do that. So while there were some products that spoke to specific generations, and while that certainly is one way to market, another way to market is to find common motivations, common needs that cross the age groups and speak to that instead. So what we learned was that there were 4 top lessons in terms of brands that were doing it well, in terms of how to speak to women around health and wellness. The first was motivate health. The second was build confidence. Third, be real. And then 4, make it personal. I'm going to show you a few examples of this. So the first one around motivating health was the example is Whole Foods. Women really found Whole Foods to be encouraging you to be healthy for you, to really inspire you to go and eat better. What women said about Whole Foods is that, when I walk through that door, I already know I'm making a better choice for myself. But they really found the communication and how Whole Foods goes to market to be very powerful in motivating health. In terms of confidence, I'm going to use Bobbi Brown as the example here. When it comes to confidence, this showed up so much in our research that these women really want to feel confident. And Bobbi Brown does a great job of this. She's for years focused on encouraging women to really live in their natural beauty, and she focuses on these messages of makeup that makes you confident and comfortable with how you look, and this is quite powerful. Another one that I don't have up on the screen, but I think is really interesting is Nike. There was someone from Nike who was talking about how he had spoken with Maria Sharapova and how their clothes, and when she looks good on the court, she's actually more confident. When she looks better, she plays better. So there are different ways to tap into confidence, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it actually can encourage this idea of looking good and the power of what that looking good can do for a woman. In terms of being real, I think we all probably know that transparency and realness in communication is quite powerful today with consumers, and Advil is doing a great job here in terms of their ads that are really real and relatable. So they bring real people into their ads, show them in a real context. The one on the screen here shows a yoga instructor that talks about Advil helps me do what I love, quite motivating to women. So again, this idea of being real. And then finally, Nike and making it personal. For these women, it is not about the brand. It is really about them and helping them achieve their goals, about your personal accomplishments. And what Nike does so great here is they're pushing without being preachy. And I think the execution here of this ad is so powerful as well. Just the fact that it's make yourself and then fill in the blank. And it's as if somebody else wrote in the word proud. So Nike, very powerful there. And just quickly, a few watch-outs from those who've missed the mark. Not surprising to see for me something that sets expectation, lacks motivation, and perhaps is a little overly provocative. In terms of the sex expectations, the example here is Berry Essentials. Berry Essentials actually did a great campaign, and it was just this one execution that seemed to kind of missed the mark. They did a great campaign around Be the Force of Beauty, but they had one execution that started, as you can see to the right, with pretty is not enough, and it came across as an expectation, not motivating. So really, pretty isn't enough, I actually have to be beautiful. So instead of it coming across as empowering, it came across a little bit as an expectation. Brooks, another one, I think Brooks did a great job in this ad in terms of really honoring its functional benefit and what the brand can do for a user. But unfortunately, it came across as unmotivating and deterring, actually reminding people that you can get injured when going to work out. So it's not very motivating. So it actually, unfortunately, turned a positive into a negative. And then finally, while Lululemon can actually be quite motivating, women also said, hey, when I look good in my Lululemon clothes, I'm more confident, I feel good, I'm motivated to go to the gym. But unfortunately, this ad, if you just looked at the visual, it actually was motivating to women. But when you read the words of the pursuit of happiness is the source of all unhappiness, people got tripped up in it. And it was almost like a negative associated with a positive and a little unclear. So sometimes being provocative can sometimes miss the mark. So to conclude, what does this mean for you? While there are similar definitions, motivations, and expectations, there are also differences by age group. So for overall health and wellness and at a category meta level. I wasn't able to get into that today. I know I'm running long, forgive me. But there are some differences also that we found as we looked at the different categories. It is all intertwined. Remember that functional is emotional, physical is mental, and so on. You really have two options to market. One is to speak to each age group and their distinct motivations, or to find a common motivation or need state versus stage or age differences so that you can appeal to all women. And then just remember the lessons that I just went over in terms of the key lessons of how to communicate and perhaps those things, avoid those things that miss the mark. And I would just conclude, and I would encourage brands, there's really a need for women to be healthy and well, both for themselves and for people in their lives. And there's an opportunity for brands to help her realize the benefits from functional to emotional. And she's seeking brands to help her in being motivated to be healthy and well and to reach her goals at any life stage. And just remember that she'd rather live in her motivations, and brands that engage from that angle, we believe, will be more successful in building lasting connections. And just as a final motivation, this came on our radar just recently, this Under Armour ad. And if you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go seek it out on YouTube. But this was an ad that we found was quite motivating to women. And you see some things up on the screen here where you had a Facebook post where this woman wrote down, most motivating commercial ever. This was an ad that was so motivating to women to get out there and get fit. And you see some of the quotes on the screen. If this doesn't motivate you to exercise, then what will? And this is what I think is the opportunity for brands and marketers in the health and wellness space, to encourage this type of motivation around health and wellness with women. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you so much for listening today to what I had to say about what women really want around health and wellness. We are writing our white paper right now on this topic. It will be coming to the Schrock Knowledge Center soon. If you want to be on a distribution list, feel free to email me. My email is up on screen. kathy.oneto@anthemww.com, so kathyoneto@anthemworldwide.com. Feel free to email me with any questions or if you'd like to be on the distribution list. And I apologize, I know I went long today, had a bit of content, but if there are one or two questions, I'm happy to try to answer. So one quick question was, what are some of the strongest commonalities and biggest differences among the generations? The first thing that I would say is that, the biggest commonality was really how health and wellness is really about helping them to achieve what they want to do and who they want to be. That was really the biggest commonality. These women all have drive, they all want to be productive, so they were very encouraged and wanting health and wellness to support who they want to be in the world. In terms of commonalities or the differences rather, I think those differences really showed up based on the different generations or the life stages that they are in. So those would be just quickly the biggest commonality and the biggest differences. So one question here is there a difference if there are kids in the household versus not? I would say that yes, there were some differences in terms of if there were kids in the household or not. If there were kids in the household, these women were very motivated to be a role model. They understood that they were somebody different. Their expanded expectation was to other people in their life. And as a mom, they understood that they became a role model. And they kind of understood that if I'm not doing it, my kids aren't going to do it as well. So the mindset definitely shifted. I think when women even got married or were in a partnership, that mindset shifted as well. They started to believe that health and wellness really is a joint effort. They started to look at it as either I'm partnering with somebody or it's a family unit, and they're looking at health and wellness in that context. All right, so there's one quick question around, you talk about motivations and expectations. How are these defined exactly? So the way that we defined motivations and expectations, we had our own internal definition, but we also in this study asked women about what how they would define these things. So motivations tended to be, these are the want tos. These are things that are internally driven, and they generally tend to be positive. Expectations are the should do's, the ought to's, and they generally are externally driven and generally are a little bit more negative. Now, the interesting thing is expectations, we started to learn not all expectations are bad, but the ones that aren't bad are the ones that are internally driven. And I would say that might give you some, starting to identify some angles in terms of trying to decipher where the split is between an expectation versus an aspiration. So that's the answer there. And then there's a quick question, targeted women in this study, was this based on domestic or international? And I will say for this particular study, this was domestic here in the United States. And then a final question here, what brand do you think is doing a great job marketing to women in the health and wellness space of food, beauty, and health? In food, another one beyond Whole Foods that is doing a good job here is Kashi. This was another brand that a lot of women purchased, and they felt motivated by this brand. It was interesting. One woman said, I wanted to upgrade my cereal, so she started to buy Kashi. So that's a brand that's speaking to these women in a good way, and that people feel is a positive choice for themselves. Around beauty, beyond Bobbi Brown, I would also say Neutrogena. I think what Neutrogena does such a good job of is being consistent with their brand, being consistent with who they are, but being able to speak to all the different age groups in a meaningful way. And women said that they really understood them and understood the different stages in life. And then finally around health, Nike does such a great job here in terms of motivating women to be healthy. And we saw that brand resonated across all of the different generations. All right, so I'll just do one final question. Sorry here. How do you market to the aspire women versus while avoiding the expected woman? Which is a really great question. The first thing I would say is first avoid common expectations. So there are some common expectations out there. I reported on this last year in our white paper last year. For women to do it all, look good, and be nice, and those are persistent expectations across all generations. So I would avoid those. I would also try to avoid the expectations that we noted here around health and wellness. Secondly, I would just say you need to do the research, as we did here, to really dig deep with these women and to understand the nuances between motivations versus expectations. And as I mentioned just a little while ago, that expectations can be good, but only if they're internally driven. And I think it requires going deep with women to really suss out where that line is crossed. And then finally, I just say test. So if you have communication, test it with women, as we often do, but sometimes things slip through the cracks, so that, that ad by Bare Essentials, again, a really positive campaign, just happened to have one slight phrase that was a little deterring. And some consumers saw that, they might have been turned off. So with that, thank you again for being with me. I apologize for going a little long, but I hope you found today to be of value. Thanks again for being with me. And again, if you'd like a copy of the paper, feel free to email me at kathyoneto@anthem.ww.com. Thanks so much.